Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 89 today. And I am here with my guest, Craig. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing great, Welsh. How are you?
I'm not too bad, mate. It's a little bit hot here in New Zealand. You know, it's deep into our summertime. It gets usually hot at this time of year. What's the weather like for you in Las Vegas at the moment?
I'm wearing a sweat jacket over here, a sweatshirt, because it's cold out there. It's like, I get up early to go to get to the morning show, to do my morning show that I do Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. To 10 a.m. in addition to the convo couch. And it's like in the 30s, like 35, 36. It might be hot in the summer in the desert, but it's cold in the winter. And we're right now in winter for us.
Oh, wow, man. I wouldn't expect a Las Vegas to get cold. I mean, who would expect that from Las Vegas? Usually it's the hot and warm place.
Yeah, but like I said, freaking wintertime, it's colder here than it is in South Florida. Let's put it that way.
Norris, how long have you been living in Las Vegas, Craig?
Only for a year. I was living in California 17 years before that.
Mm-hmm. What made you leave California? Did you just get so fed up with it? Because a lot of people in the area that you were living in California. What was the area you were living in?
Pasadena.
You went to Las Vegas.
Pasadena.
So yeah. when you were living in California, like in that area, right, for the last time, what differences did you see in the last years? And what was the most dodgy encounters you had from in that area? You know, that made you just want to leave.
Well, I gotta say that the price kept consistently going up since I ever moved there, which was in like 2000, right? Like 1999, 2000, I moved out to California from the East Coast. I was in Florida. I was born in New York, went to school in South Florida, did a lot of growing up over there, spent a lot of time in New York, though. Most New Yorkers do that, back and forth, New York and Florida. They're called snowbirds. And then eventually I moved to California. And ever since I moved to California, it was slowly going up in price. From the time I moved there. It never stopped. It was increasing all the time. And by the time I left, it was outrageously expensive, even during the COVID. But the COVID measures is what kind of put it over the edge, right? Like, I think me and Fiorella, we had started the Convo Couch. We've been there for, we had been doing it for 4.5 years plus at the time. But where we started with the activists in the streets and the Bernie Sanders campaign to where we ended, it was just totally different. We had lost our community of activists because they had lost their friggin' mind during the COVID. They just,
How exactly did they lose their mind? Because you say that you were a fan of Bernie Sanders before, and how exactly did they lose their minds? Did they just fall in line with a lot of what people were saying about COVID and stuff?
Mostly. And that's how it separated, certain people within the party. Well, first off, when we started the Convo Couch, Welch, we wanted to inform a lot of our progressive brothers and sisters about foreign policy because that's where they were lacking. That's the blind spot. Just like with the populist right now, their blind spot is foreign policy. Same thing with the progressive left. They were just ignorant to what was going on. And we were always involved in understanding what was going on in foreign policy. That's how me and Fiorella kind of clicked. We were able to talk about these things. So we started doing the Convo Couch. We got close with these people. And the number one movement was the Medicare for All movement. And it seemed to make a lot of sense in 2015, 2016, that we had a system where people were just falling through the cracks, dying on the streets, can't afford health care. Me, myself, if I broke a leg or I sprained something when I was playing sports, I'd get hit with a huge bill because I never had health insurance, So it was always our number one issue.
What would you say was the most expensive bill that you got?
Jesus, I remember I went to the hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and because I thought I was having a panic attack or something was wrong. And I think I had too much caffeine and sugar and stuff from those Tulsa supermarkets. I can't forget what they're called. These, gas stations, and they used to have these sweet teas. And I used to drink a shit ton of them because it was hot in Tulsa too as well. So I had this heart palpitation. I went to the hospital and they did all these tests. A doctor didn't even speak to me. And next thing I know, I was hit with a $2,000 bill. And I was like, holy cow, how could this happen? Because they said they ran all these heart tests that they never talked to me about. But, and that's why I was always on board. And I knew a lot of people who had passed away in the community because we would get to know a lot of these people in California as far as who needed health care. And it was a movement. But when the COVID came around, the same people that we were pushing against, the same people that we had hated at one point, which was the pharmaceutical lobbies, was now being lifted up and, what's the word? I don't want to say revered, but praised. I'm like, wait a second. I thought our number one adversary, the person who was the people who are getting in the way of Medicare for all or universal health care were the drug companies, was Big Pharma, were the lobbyists. Now we're going to believe them. Now they're good people. Now they're trustworthy. Who cares about all the lies? But now they're telling the truth. And, we saw this whole thing coming from a mile away as far as when it came to COVID from two different pieces of information. Now, we had already been hip to data manipulation because of elections. When you learn everything about elections, you learn to understand about data manipulations and how they twist the narrative and how they fool people and they trick people. So when it came to the COVID, there were two things that really stuck out to us. Number one was when early in the game, when they changed how you classify a death, making it easier to classify the death as a COVID death. That would also give the hospitals more money, more kickdowns, because anytime they had a positive COVID test, they would get extra money. That was all in the CARES Act. So they would want to get people into the classification of having COVID and passing away from COVID and the extra treatments they can charge them. So that was really kind of like suspicious off the jump where we're like, okay, this seems a little bit funny. Yeah, I'd say it's coming out of a lab because they're really trying to heighten this thing and scare people. And then when there came the vaccine issue, the second part of the data information was when they classified somebody as either vaccinated or partially vaccinated as the same, but called them unvaccinated. In other words, you weren't considered fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after your second shot. So if you got the first shot and then you contracted COVID, you were considered unvaccinated, not partially vaccinated, but unvaccinated. So that's how they were fluffing the numbers when it came to the vaccine, because a lot of people got COVID in between their first and second shot, and yet they were considered unvaccinated by the numbers. So we saw this thing coming a mile away. We were like, no, we're not going to play your games. And a lot of those Bernie Sanders progressives bought into that whole crap. They bought into
I just wanted to ask one thing. There was a lot of theories that a lot of people say, of course, and a lot of right-wing media says, and a lot of left-wing media says, but it did take the left-wing media a bit of time to say this. A lot of left-wing media and right-wing media says that the virus originated in China. But there was evidence that came out that originally the virus actually, there was, I think it was a United States mayor who said that he thinks he had COVID. And apparently there was leaked documents coming out that apparently that the virus was around in Italy. And there was also cases being recorded back in early 2019. And this comes back to Fort Worth Delta, right? The biolab. Yeah. And this comes into the United States biolab, especially with all the other diseases like Ebola, swine flu. In your opinion, Craig, do you think COVID came from China, or do you think it actually originated from the United States? Because there actually are there was someone who did a different research and did an investigation, and they found out that it actually didn't come from China. It came from the United States. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people say that it was used to blame. Some people say that they would use it to blame China for causing COVID, but there are some, especially Chinese media outlets and also other independent outlets that says it actually came from the United States. What is your opinion towards that, Craig?
Well, whether it came out of China through EcoHealth Alliance, outsourced, not the Chinese government. That is the argument. Yes, I think that it was definitely put out one aspect where they said it came from China. That comes to the Bannonites and all these other guys who are anti-CCP, anti-China. Donald Trump even repeated, it came from China. It was China's fault. It's no. The best case scenario, if it did come out of Wuhan, that came out of funding from EcoHealth Alliance, which comes right back to the United States and comes back to our hands. So whether it came out of Fort Detrick in North Carolina, which a lot of people tend to think it came there, the thing that we have to acknowledge is we've been doing these type of testings for quite some time. If Ukraine, the biolabs that were caught in Ukraine from Pentagon funding don't give you a clear-cut vision of what's really going on, and that's old school, deep state, United States intelligence been doing these bioweapons testings. They've been even doing bioweapons trying to cater them to certain different types of DNAs or types or races and whatnot. I think that's why you'll see a lot of freak out in China, because they'll think that this bioweapon was kind of maybe engineered specifically for them. And I think the Russians felt that way too as well. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We've been doing it in more than just labs in China or bases in the United States. We got caught with our hand in the cookie jar in Ukraine, biolabs all over the place, funded by the Pentagon. So the real issue is, like, when are we going to hold our own country accountable? And for the oligarchs or the predator class, or whoever's promoting this type of bioweapons testing, when are we going to hold them accountable? That's the question. The whole China did it is just to make you look the other way. This has a homegrown virus handprints all over it. It's USA all the way, and people have to stomach that.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to that, do you think that, like, other diseases like Ebola, H1N, SARS, and the Spanish flu, which actually didn't actually start in Spain, it started in the United States, do you think that all of those, viruses originated from, the CDC and the United States government to, do the depopulation agenda and population control, and eugenics, which is a very evil, belief, if you probably studied that? When you look at that, do you think that a lot of those diseases, especially when you look at a lot of the locations these viruses began at, they were near biolabs, do you think the United States created all those diseases?
Well, when I've looked at some of the testing, a lot of people said that this type of testing created an MI6 British, testing, then on to the United States. We know that the United States took the Nazis' Operation Paperclip and just acclimated them into their testings and their bioweapons and everything else like that. So it's not like we defeated Nazism. We might have defeated the Germans, but we took Nazism with us, and we've been using it for quite some time, and now we're funding them directly. I haven't done enough studying about the Spanish flu and some of the other flus. I could tell you this much, though. I did a little poking into AIDS, and I can tell you the same barricades that existed now today, where the FDA is not approving certain drugs like ivermectin or whatnot. It's off patent. They're not pushing it. They're demonizing it within the media. Same thing happened with the AIDS situation with AZT and everything, where they were pushing AZT. The movie The Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey, he's real cool, man. It really paints a picture and shows you what the FDA was doing back in the days. They want to control. They want to be your daddy. And they work hand in hand with the government. They work hand in hand with intelligence. So, I don't know necessarily if all these other diseases definitely came from gain of function testing and whatnot. Like I said, I haven't done enough looking into it, but I see a pattern building. And I saw the pattern clearly with AIDS. They tried to push remdesivir with AIDS and it failed the trials. Now it comes around. It's like a disgusting, terrible, killing drug that just won't go away. And now it's here, and they're still using remdesivir for the coronavirus, regardless of all the negative side effects it's pushed out. So, like I said, I can't go too far back when it comes to the other flus or diseases, but it wouldn't put it past me, because it does seem obvious that there's a group of people out there who think that we're useless eaters, that we're taking up too much oxygen. They don't want us around. And it seems like they've been around for quite some time. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were behind a lot of those other viruses. I just can't say for sure.
Mm-hmm. So right now, as we all know, the World Economic Forum, all of those members are getting together in Davos, as we all know. And apparently, of course, lately, Carl Schwab, he actually, couldn't continue it. He couldn't go there because he had to pull out. George Soros had to pull out, and also Bill Gates, just bring that as a head up. When you look at that, one thing, Craig, that I looked up for like my prediction of the next pandemic, it's quite scary right now, because they're saying in 2025, in 2 years' time, they're predicting there's going to be a cyber attack. But there's a book that came out, I think a few years ago, called SARS it's called SARS from 2025 to 2028. And what's scary is lately, as we all know, you probably heard the news that they were doing, tests on rats to make stronger COVID variants. And what I also noticed is now they've also apparently let out a disease, an ancient disease that comes from like Serbia or something like that. In your opinion, what is the next pandemic that they are going to do, and what year do you think it's going to happen in?
That's a good question because it's a fun question. All right, so first time I asked this, I'm just gonna throw that out there. Now, I'm gonna say 2025, and I think it's gonna start early, like it did last time, February, March. And I think it's going to be something like a monkeypox, another animal, whatnot. They might claim it's respiratory or whatever the case may be, but I think it will definitely be there because the reason why I say that is because, and I'm just spitballing when it comes to the numbers and what it could be, because it could be anything. Because what they're doing is they're showing, you talked about this book, the SARS book that came out. There's also another book that Bill Gates wrote that people are very concerning, how to prepare for the next pandemic or something, right? And also right now, as we speak, through the WHO and the WEF, the WEF is trying to push upon the WHO to amend the international health regulations and also come up with a treaty, which really all talks about how they're going to handle these pandemics. And that's what's in these books when it comes to Bill Gates. That's when it comes into the contagion. I have you seen the act they put up, it's kind of like the next lockstep, and they even put a video to it. It's called Contagion something. Catastrophic Contagion, where they lay out just like Lockstock did. There was a respiratory illness that came from this area in South America, and now we have to communicate. Now we have to make sure. And a lot of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure they take control of what they call disinformation, right? And that it just kind of goes to, they want to make sure that in the future, whatever type of virus or outbreak or pandemic they thrust upon us, and they said they can define what a pandemic is right now, right? That's what the WHO is doing. That's what WEF is doing. They've changed the definitions on virus, on vaccine. They're doing all this stuff. They're manipulating the language, the laws, and the rules to make sure that they can have complete control. So I don't think it's really about a pandemic or an illness that they're really worried about. It's just about quelling the people before they get out of hand. They learn too much. They identify who these people are, and we get rid of them. That's what they want to stop. The greatest threat to the empire is its own citizens. So I think a lot of people caught on these last couple years, and they're going to be watching out and looking out for the next pandemic. And the thing they're going to try to push more than anything is to make sure that we have robust discourse. So we have robust debate out there. That's what they silenced before. Too many people got in their own echo chamber. They were able to use the mainstream media as their own vessel, their own tool to get their information out, and they were always shielded from anybody who had a dissenting voice. That is what we need to push forth next time when this shit happens. More than anything, we have to scream from the top of our lungs that we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to take it laying down. And we got to make sure we have these conversations so we get to the bottom of what is what quicker than we did last time. Because last time there was too much of a lull from people. They kind of sat back. What was going on? They didn't see it coming. They didn't see the signs. They didn't hear about Event 201. They didn't read the lockstep document. They didn't understand that they've been having, what do you call it? They were buying all the, when you own something, the
farmland? Are you talking about the farmland?
No, I'm talking about the patents. They were buying patents for coronavirus go back to like 2009 or 2010, right? Patents for, all vaccines for these kinds of things. Dr. David Martin talks about it. So all the information was there. It was just late getting out. And when we started getting it out, they started doing what they did to you right now, Welsh. Just giving you strikes, taking you down, thwarting the information, seizing your momentum. You know what I'm saying? Making sure that you censor yourself. That's what they did. They're doing it now. They're still trying to do it. We just got to push harder, push faster, and push louder.
Right now, do you think that, the world, the citizens of the world are waking up? And do you think that the New World Order is failing? Because especially right now, I saw a very good article on Sputnik that actually said that this guy has an opinion that the world economic is, failing, and especially with Carl Schwab and, George Soros, and especially with a lot of people waking up and seeing their secrets and stuff like that. Do you think the elite are losing or no?
I think they're starting to lose. but they haven't lost. They still have their ace in the hole, and that's the division. I still see in the United States a lot of people being divided. You had an article up there about election integrity stuff, and it was written by the Gateway Pundit. Now, unfortunately, for some reason, the best articles that come out about Corona or about election integrity come out from those two outlets, the Epoch Times, which is, questionable where they come from, and the Gateway Pundit. There's still a lot of their writings, though, could be very divisive, you know what I'm saying, and can move you into a certain team. So even though they have a lot of good information, they're using that good information to also move you into a certain corner. Red team, anti-China, blame the Marxists, blame the communists. So even though the elites are losing a little bit and there's a lot of information, they still got us divided, and they still have the mechanisms, and they still are using the same tactics to move people to look at their neighbors rather than look at the elites. So I still think that they're losing, but they haven't lost. And it's up to us to understand that our neighbor is not our enemy, but the ruling class is. So the game still, it's in mid-stroke right now. I do think there's a lot more people waking up, Welsh, and seeing the shit and realizing that, their number one tactic is divide and conquer, but not enough still. And I'm nervous of that.
So, speaking of that, tell me about how you met, Friella, your buddy on the convo couch, and what would you say has been your favorite interview that you've done with her in the convo couch?
So me and Fiorella met about 5.5 years ago. We worked in a restaurant together, close to 6 years ago. We weren't longtime friends. And in the restaurant that we worked at, somebody had heard me talking about Bernie Sanders and talking about politics. And they're like, you should talk to Fee. She sounds just like you. And, me and Fee got to talking a little bit, kind of exchange information, Facebook friends. And then we would kind of team up together for political debates with people out there. So we just started kind of communicating on that level. And she was one of the few people that communicated on a political, social level, as me. A lot of my other friends were sports junkies and other fun things and stuff. But me and Fee had that bond. And when I moved back, I had to go back to Florida for a little bit to be with my ailing stepfather. And about a year later, when I got back, I hooked back up with Fee. And we got together and said, hey, man, what do you think we start a show? And we started having meetings and talking about it. And then the last meeting we had before we said, let's do this, we were at the Jimmy Dore show. Ro Khanna was on stage. He was there. This was a while ago. But me and Fiorella were still pretty new on our friendship. We said, let's do this. And we started the Convo Couch. And like I said, it was there because we were involved in the progressive community at the time, Bernie Sanders community. We thought the blind spot was foreign policy. We thought if we started our own independent media, it was part of our responsibilities and our duties, because all the grassroots progressive candidates can never get on the mainstream media, can get much, interview time. So we're like, well, why don't we provide a place where we can interview them and we can sharpen their skills and we can just put it out there so a lot of other grassroots voters can maybe latch on to these progressives. So we started that years and years ago, and here we are today, close to 5.5, 6 years later. Interviews that I love and are great. I mean, damn.
I also, with the interview question, I just wanted to, sorry, I should have put this in there. I was also going to say, what was the favorite interview that you did with Friella, and what would you say was your favorite, on that favorite interview, was your favorite, and what would you say was your favorite subject that you did an interview on, and what was the greatest piece of advice or story that you ever heard from someone out of any of your videos?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great interviews and stuff like that. When I start thinking about these interviews and subjects, I mean, obviously, I'm an election guy, so I love election stuff, but there's no, it's funny because when it came to, war, right? You have people like Scott Ritter and other people who are ex-military that can tell you what's going on. People who've had time and experience, experts on the battlefield, and they can tell you what's going on about war. When we had COVID, we had the doctors, the frontline doctors. They can come out there, they can speak. They have a history of medicine. They're educated. They're the experts when it came to the situation. But elections, who are the experts? There is no doctors. There is no military experts. There's us. So there's not like some top of the food chain when it comes to elections. Guys who are friends of mine to this day, like Tim Canova, was a great interview, what he went through with elections, because it was really a moment where we were like, holy cow, these elections are really fraudulent. Debbie Wasserman Schultz and whatnot. And I amazing interviews too, like Dr. McCullough. When I got Dr. McCullough to come on, I was just blown away. I put a list of 5 doctors that I want to get on, and he was the long shot, and he was the first one to contact me back. And that's just, we've had him on 4 or 5 times now, different shows, both my morning show, my evening show. So I love the interviews with him, and those are great. But the number one interview that I think that me and Fiorella had, and we also got to interview Tulsi Gabbard and got questions with her. That was a fun time.
Wow, I didn't actually know that before. That's awesome.
She came to our studio when Nico House was in town from California, and she was in California, and our studio was at my house. So she came to our house down in our basement, did our studio, did our interview, and then she would have events. And whenever she was in California or we were following her on the road when we went to New Hampshire to follow her in the primaries, she would always have a press gaggle at every one of her events. She'd go back and answer questions from the press, and I thought that was so impressive because all the other Democratic candidates, they shield themselves from questions. They hide, you know what I'm saying? They walk out of rooms fast into hallways and crazy shit. It is what it is. But she was an awesome interview. But the best interview, right, has to be Reverend Annie Chambers, the ex-Black Panther. We were in Maryland, and we went and interviewed her. It's just something special. She's just amazing. Her stories, what she went through, what she talked about, unity, you know what I'm saying? This is a woman who talked about, she's a Black Panther. Her brother was one of Malcolm X's security team guards, close to one of the bodyguards. So did
she ever meet Malcolm X or no?
Oh yeah, she's met Malcolm X. She's talked about stories.
Wow, that's awesome.
Oh yeah. She had a big picture of Malcolm X. She's talked stories about Malcolm X and whatnot. She loved Malcolm. Yeah, she was amazing. But the story that she tells to me that's so amazing is that, the classic story of her, working with the Ku Klux Klan in Vegas to shut down the Strip. This is Black Panthers and poor people from the Poor People's Campaign working with KKK members to occupy the Strip in Vegas, to shut it down because they stopped issuing welfare checks, and they work together to make sure they can get that check. And when you hear those stories, man, it's just great. And she was one of my favorite interviews, and I'll never forget that interview. Yeah. Reverend Annie Chambers.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah.
With Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of people say that she was actually a member of the World Economic Forum. What is your opinion towards that? And what is your opinion like towards Tulsi Gabbard going into more, she's no longer a Democrat. I would say she's more of an independent person. But what is your theory to her of talking to more conservatives and exposing more of that? Are you still a fan of hers? Finding out she was a member of the World Economic, Economic Forum Global Leaders thing?
Oh, she was the Young Global Leaders, right? She was on the website, whatnot. Listen, those particular things, if they go there at a younger age or whatever, they go and they see what's going on. It doesn't mean they're going to consistently go along with their plan, right? I'm more upset with Tulsi Gabbard because I feel she's abandoned her post. And her number one issue was she was the regime change candidate. She was anti-regime change candidate. She wanted to stop these wasteful regime change wars. So for people who hold foreign policy on a high level,
basically Ron Paul wanting to end the Federal Reserve, wanting to end the IRS, the bankers, all that. Well,
she
stuff.
Was more. She didn't concentrate on that stuff. She never really was open about ending the Fed or the IRS. She did have libertarian views. She was more about, we need to get out of these countries. We need to stop. Which would kind of cut the tails off of the IMF and the Fed. And, we understand how the whole system works. But she was about, let's not intervene. Let's stop going into these countries. Let's stop causing migration. She was all about that stuff. Not so much in Latin America. She was more concentrated in the Middle East and whatnot. I think her time in service and what she saw in Iraq had really changed her as a person. So she was there. Now she constantly mentions the border and border security. I hate that. I hate when Republicans do it. I hate when Democrats do it. If you're talking about the border, you're just talking about a distraction. You're not talking about the causality of migration. And the causality of migration is the fact that we have 82 bases in Latin America. And they're not there to be the Boy Scouts. They're there to help these corporations go in and resource extract from these other countries while thrusting all these IMF loans and austerity measures on the people, causing chaos, causing instability, and that's
just like the military coups that's going on, the military coup that's going on in like Peru and Brazil right now.
Exactly.
And it's like, especially in Latin America, it's absolutely
it's going on in Peru. It's not going on in Brazil. Brazil, there's no military coup. They're not going through with it. I mean, that was that. See, that's the reason why.
Well, I mean, not sorry, pardon me. I mean, CIA op. I was supposed to mention that, Peru, but
I think the CIA is okay with Lula getting into power. I don't think they're putting him into power. I think they once had him removed from power. I mean, people forget to talk about that. Brazil is very complicated. I don't know if they're just done with the Bolsonaro experiment, but I think it was just one of those situations that they were going to be cool with whoever got in, and Lula won rightfully, as far as I'm concerned. And, there was a lot of chatter about the whole Article 142 and the military getting involved, a lot of noisy muddying of the waters and stuff. But, Lula won. And, I mean, I don't think it's a CIA coup at all. Now, removing Pedro Castillo in Peru, definitely CIA. And Lisa Kenna showed up 3 days after they removed Pedro Castillo. She worked for the CIA for like 9 years. And she works for the State Department. I think she even I didn't even think she spent some time with Pompeo. She showed up there to christen the new government, and the people in the indigenous people of Peru have come out to say enough is enough.
So coming towards this, you're also talking about election integrity. So you're an expert on it. How long have you been studying about elections for? And what country would you say in the whole entire world has the best election system that's very easy, that's very good, that's very fair, and it's not like the American election system, which is just a mess right now?
Yeah. It's been over 6 years since I got into it heavily. The Bernie Sanders lawsuit, which was not Bernie Sanders, but followers or people who supported Bernie Sanders, who donated money to him, sued the DNC for a fraudulent primary. In Florida, Jared Beck, if you want to go check out his stuff, he was the lawyer who handled the case. Well, halfway through, they stopped and dismissed the case and said notwithstanding or not on standing, they couldn't continue to take the case. But before that happened, the Democratic lawyer for the DNC said, listen, technically, if they wanted to, the DNC could go into the back room filled with cigar smoke and pick whoever we want. We don't have to give you an honest primary. We're a corporation. We can do whatever we want. And that really kind of just lit a fire under my you-know-what and said, that's it. I'm going to learn everything about elections. I'm going to study elections in and out. And I just dove into the whole election process. Now, I told you, I think before we started the Convo Couch, we wanted to alert people to foreign policy. So we made a lot of foreign policy friends, people who'd go to Latin America and we look at the socioeconomics and the culture and whatnot, and do a lot of reporting on it. People like the Gray Zone and other groups out there. People from Code Pink. We know people from different organizations now, that actually walk the walk and go to these countries. So when Nicaragua came around 2 years ago, and a friend of ours said, "Hey man, you want to go to Nicaragua? They want election observers to come in there, and you guys know elections better than anybody else. Why don't you come check it out?" And when we got there, there was about 300 to 400 election observers, international election observers. A lot of them were interested in the socioeconomics, and they were interested in the economic system and the reproduction of food and all this other stuff. But they didn't kind of analyze elections the way we were analyzing them in the States for the past 3 previous years. So when we went to Nicaragua, we went to scrutinize, and we don't play teams when we go see an election. We don't play team sports. All we care about is national sovereignty. And that means that country has the right to choose its own leaders, to choose its own vision, to choose what happens to its own resources, and by their choice. So when we got to Nicaragua, we really kind of just analyzed every single part of the election. We met with the election officials for hours. We asked them questions. We were open to all the polls. And I got to be honest with you, After Nicaragua, we have observed Honduras, Colombia, Brazil. Fiorella was in Peru for that election. I got to tell you, Nicaragua was the first election I saw, and I still think it was the best election I saw. I haven't been around the world yet, so I haven't seen all the elections, but Nicaragua has all the things that a lot of patriots and America First people here in the States ask for. They have 1 day of voting in your designated location, your precinct. You must have ID. It's expedient to vote. They do hand counting in the precincts, precinct counting, so the chain of custody is intact, and they give you results that night. That's in Nicaragua, ladies and gentlemen, compared to what we see in the United States, which is complete trash. It's bad. Bad. Right. So, I mean, Nicaragua.
I didn't expect to hear that.
I know you did. I got you there. I got you there, Welsh. But Nicaragua, one of the best elections I've saw, and I'm going to stand by the elections in Nicaragua. I love them. We can do this here. It's that simple. This is not rocket science. They get it done in 1 day on a Sunday. You can track it, chain of custody, no mail-ins, no drop boxes, no 3 weeks of early voting, no week after for counting, none of that crap in which an election can be changed and turned upside down. It's all solid, chain of custody in front of the people, fair, transparent, and trackable. Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm. Also, a lot of things people seem to notice is a lot of people, from the Western media say that, like, speaking about those Latin American countries, a lot of people say that, like, Cuba's elections are rigged. And a lot of people say that Russia's elections are rigged and Belarus's elections are rigged. But I did some research. Do you know much about these countries' election system or no?
I don't know about them yet. We're going to Cuba in March, but they did say the same thing about Nicaragua. They were saying Nicaragua had pantomime elections. Nicaragua's elections are fake. Daniel Ortega's a dictator. This is all for show. And we were spread throughout the whole country. 400 international election observers. We were on the Caribbean coast, the other side of the capital of Managua. They flew us out there in it's one of those little small Cessna airplanes that fit about 8 people. So we had 2 of those planes go to the other side, the autonomous zone, and their elections were as clean as can be. So when you hear the people, and this is why we do this, Welsh, because the first area for our country to manufacture consent to intervene or invade or get rid of that dictator is to say that their elections suck. So we can go over there and we can see those elections. The first thing we can say is, Nicaragua's elections are way fairer than ours. Shut your mouth, you U.S. politician. Fix our elections first. Then maybe you can go talk about these other countries. So it doesn't surprise me if they're saying that these other elections are fake. Now, my friend Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, and my other friend Wyatt Reed, they were in the Donbass for the referendum. And Wyatt Reed.
Yeah, which was a fair referendum. I mean, it
fair
was.
as can be. The guy who reported on it, he was in Colombia for the second round. We were in the first round, so we didn't see him there. But we were in Nicaragua with him, and we were in Honduras with him. And believe you me, we had an impact. Like, we learned so much from these people that go to these areas, that speak the language, that they tell us so much. But when the Convo Couch shows up, we were able to educate those other activists on elections, and some of them ran with it. So when we were doing Honduras elections together, we had Terry Mattson in one place, we had Wyatt Reed in another, we had me and Fiorella in another one, and we're texting and we're talking, and we understand what to look for, what to make sure is fair, and how to report on it. So when he was also in the Donbass, I knew I was going to get an accurate report of the election being fair, and it was fair as can be, they said.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at that, if you were, like, let's say, the President of the United States, how would you fix the United States, like, political, like, let's say if you could, how would you fix the United States political system, and how would you stop election fraud from happening? And how would you, like, fix it in the right way it should be fixed? And how would you stop the Federal Reserve and a lot of these corporations giving, big monies, especially to Democrat politicians and Republican politicians, and also, for example, helping out, like, other parties like the Libertarian Party or the Socialist Party or the Green Party or the Constitutionalist Party winning, because in basically in countries, United States and Britain, there's only seems to be two winners, the right and the left.
Yeah. Well, that's a very hard question to answer because I don't know how I'd be able to do anything without getting shot the first hour, right? And I'm not a Marxist, but I kind of have this Marxist mentality that like this shit needs to be shattered in a million pieces and started over again. But what I can tell you what I would do from an election point of view, because I do believe elections would fix a lot of the problems in the debate we have with the isms, right? So there was a libertarian guy the other day I was kind of debating with, and I was debating it from a kind of like socialist point of view, where, you know, we were talking about ownership of things. And they were like, well, you know what? I don't want the government controlling shit. Just like I have a phone carrier, I can pick another carrier if I don't like that phone carrier. I'm like, well, you're limited, but you can't pick a, you know, in a lot of states or where you live, you can't pick a, you know, who gives you your water. There's only one company. We have all these corporate monopolies, in other words. And I said, you rather have things decided in a courtroom, in a corporate boardroom rather than a city council meeting or a courtroom, you know. And the thing about it is that that's corrupted now too as well. But it's corrupted because we don't have proper representation because of our elections are messed up. So if I was president or ruler or whatever, what I would do is I would sign an executive order for snap elections across the board and one system to start off with. And I would make it just as simple as can be, right? Start over fresh. And I would just do the 1 day of voting, national holiday. I would keep it simple, stupid. Everything I've observed overseas in Nicaragua, Colombia, the way you go in, it's expedient. You vote, you're out. Everything's done in front of you. It's public counting. And we have a whole new slate of whole new lawmakers and everything right there. And I would start from that, from ground zero. And I would try to keep my elections as clean as can be. I would use everything in my power, executive orders, to make sure there was 100% transparency in our elections so we would get the proper representation of, you know, of candidates. And here's the thing, too, as well. If we even fixed all those rules, there's the rules about how to get on the ballot that are also a problem. There's rules right now. I mean, there's control mechanisms with the media. The media only talks about one narrative, one candidate. We do have independent media now. We can make a little bit of a noise there, too, as well. So we have problems that already exist outside the actual framework. But that's what I would do right there. I can do that soundly. As far as the Fed and all that other stuff, I don't even want to say what I would do with a lot of things because I don't want the FBI knocking on my door for my answers. Let's put it that way. You know, I think that the way that the Italians handled Mussolini was merited. Let's put it that way.
So, talking about that, what country would you say? I mean, the United States elections are pretty bad. What country would you say, despite the USA, has the worst election laws, like in the developed world, that is just shocking? That's just awful.
I haven't been able to witness that other than here at home. You know what I'm saying? I haven't gone to a country yet whose elections are so screwed up than the United States. I mean, we have elections that are just comical. I mean, 3 weeks of early voting, mass mail-outs, drop boxes, some proprietary software accounting. We can't even look at the mechanism. The majority of our votes are not even counted in the precinct they're cast in. They're taken to another location.
What is your opinion on like Carrie Lake, how she's like trying to, you know, overturn the Arizona election? And what is your opinion like on the midterms?
Yeah.
And how did you think that went?
So here's the thing. When it came to Brazil, I tell people all the time, the number one reason we cannot cry wolf when it comes to Brazil is because we have some legitimate, serious election discrepancies and gripes here at home. What happened to Carrie Lake was just ridiculous. And I'm going to be doing, the Twitter files? I'm going to be putting up my first one tonight, the election files. And the election files, number one, is going to talk about the differences between Bolsonaro and Donald Trump and their elections, because a lot of people try to draw parallels that just weren't true. And I'm going to explain that in those files. The second Twitter election files I'm going to do is going to be on the Carrie Lake election. Let me just tell you about some math. Here's what I say all the time, Welsh. Nobody catches anybody cheating in elections. The math catches you. The math doesn't add up. Elections have a certain patterns, the way they go. They're very consistent. You notice when I don't know if you've watched any American elections, but what they'll do is like, with 60% of the vote in, we're going to call Texas for Joe Biden. Well, what they'll say is that they have a voting pattern, which they know will not deviate out enough, and to which the person who's challenging Joe Biden could catch him. Those patterns are pretty consistent. That's why in 2020, when we had these patterns come in the middle of the night, there were mathematical impossibilities. It was impossible for Joe Biden to get that many consistent amount of votes versus Donald Trump that little in the middle of the night, and how they came in through drop boxes and ballots and stuff, which once again, no chain of custody. This is how you can swing it and stuff. So that's one way. The math will catch you. So the original question was what? I'm so sorry.
What country, despite USA, has the worst, election laws?
So So what I've witnessed in these countries, I haven't witnessed anything like what I witnessed in the United States. The United States is ridiculous, and the Kerry Lake election. That's what I was talking about. Kerry Lake. Okay, so here's the numbers. When I asked the person in Nicaragua if they had any drop boxes or mail-in ballots, do you know how he answered me? He laughed. No. Colombia, do you guys have any mail-ins or drop boxes? No. They know that's the quickest and easiest way to steal an election. Jimmy Carter with James Baker and a bipartisan convention talked about it. The easiest way, the area that is most ripe for fraud, is the drop boxes and the mail-in ballots. There's no chain of custody. So they don't have them in these other countries. In Maricopa County, there was 2.4 eligible voters on the voter list. Maricopa County being the largest county in Arizona, the majority of people in Maricopa, 2.4 eligible voters on the voters list. Well, they mailed out 1.9 million early ballots. And this is according to the recorder and the testimony he had for the 2-day trial when they were trying to decide whether they could bring the case. He even said 1.9 million ballots went out 3 weeks early out of 2.4 million eligible voters.
That's ridiculous.
That's 80%.
Outrageous.
And here's the thing, Welsh, less than 900,000 of those ballots came back. So there's over 1 million mail-in ballots that are just floating around. So when Kerry Lake was repeating what I was saying, well, they could just keep counting until they get the winner they want. She's not lying. She's not lying. You cannot have that. If 70% of your votes that are casted in an election are from mail-ins, you do not have a fair election. That number needs to be way below 10%. It should be way below 5%. The majority of elections should be done in person at the precincts in the chain of custody where they count the ballots in the same place they are voted on. That's it. And that's how you have a fair election. It's one of the only ways. That's why they have an election day. It was a sacred day. Now it's shit. Now it's just give me my sticker. Let me vote. Put it in the mail. Let me go drop it off in a drop box. Hey, in half the states, I can give you my ballot and you can go turn it in for me. Ballot harvesting is legal in 26 states. That is ridiculous. Somebody can bring in 1,000 ballots? One person? Ridiculous. You'll never have a fair election, especially when there's no chain of custody. And there's no chain of custody from the ballot companies, the companies that are making the ballots. There's no chain of custody. Can't have a fair election.
So talking about that, I just wanted to say two things. One, you should check out a really good doc. I just wanted to say a shout out to Eric and Lila Hart. They have a very good documentary called American Voter Fraud. And in that documentary, they point out the history of voter fraud in America. They talk about the Federal Reserve. They talk about the bankers and how they control it. And also how, election in the United States. Very good documentary. It's called American History of Voter Fraud. Please check you and Friella to check it out. You may not agree with their political ideologies because they're conservative, but they're very nice people, very sweet. Just wanted to give them a shout out. Definitely, you should recommend checking them out. Speaking of that, Craig, I just wanted to also mention right now, you probably saw. Right now, of course, when you look at now, speaking of elections, what is your opinion on all of the American taxpayers' money that is going towards Ukraine, and especially with President Zelensky getting treated like some kind of queen, like basically getting, like a plane ride in, getting like, the royal family. And what is like, when you studied it, what was your opinion about like the genocide that's been happening in Donbass since 2014? Pretty much, which is no different to how there's Palestinians and there's Yemenis people and there's Somalians getting bombed, by the military industrial complex, which is committing crimes. When you look at like the Donbass area, where you're having like far right neo Nazis, the Azov Battalion, which is backed by the United States, which is funded by the United States taxpayers' money. When you look at that, and also when you look at that, when you first found out about that stuff, learning about the Donbass region, learning about the history of the Azov Battalion, and learning more about President Zelensky, how sick to your stomach, and like especially studying Operation Paperclip and all that, etc., how sick to your stomach were you when you actually found out about that stuff?
Sick, but not surprised. It's crazy because, there's a guy by the name of Gore Vidal passed away a couple years ago. He used to say we live in the United States of amnesia, and people just don't have a freaking memory of what happened yesterday sometimes. And with Ukraine, you can go back to the 90s and see how America tried to always stick its nose in and use Ukraine as somewhat of a proxy. But things really heightened and got disgusting in 2014. And we started our show in 2015. And in the first month, we used to do one show a week, the Convo Couch. I think it was show 2 or show 3. We were talking about the atrocities that were happening in the Donbass. That when Viktor Yanukovych was couped and had a Western-backed coup and was fleeing the country, he was warning Putin. Said, Putin, you're going to have to intervene in the Donbass because these people are going to be coming for blood. He understood who was coming into power. And, it just points out the hypocrisy of foreign
Craig,
policy.
can I just say something? Sorry if I interrupt you
No,
there.
it's okay.
I just want to get my opinion on this. When I watched this brilliant video of yesterday of what was happening in Donbass, and it's just awful. This is obviously, when the Russian army came in, liberated it from, a lot of the neo-Nazis. And the stuff I was seeing was absolutely insane. The killing of the ethnic Russians, the bombing that goes on there in Donbass and Donetsk is just absolutely insane. And it's not just that. Seeing like the Nazi rituals, in these underground bases, the symbols, this and that. And it's not just that, but especially in Ukraine, where you're having, far right groups, far right camps where they're teaching kids to do the Nazi salutes. When they're teaching kids to do this, they're teaching kids to do, hate Russians, hate this and hate that. It's just disgusting. And the fact, not just America's taxpayers' money, but New Zealand taxpayers' money, Britain's taxpayer money is going to the Azov Battalion, a far-right group, which was literally proven in the United States government, which the United States government back in 2014, I think it was, said they were pretty much, a far-right group and they were a terrorist group. But then all of a sudden they stopped doing that. Now they changed it and were literally a group who were banned on Facebook. And then all of a sudden they were allowed to go back on Facebook in the beginning of like the freaking conflict. It's just, and you learn about the history of the Operation Paperclip. You learn about history of, if you think about it,
Operation Cyclone, have you ever heard that one? That's the one where the United States were using the Uyghur Muslims in China to smuggle in Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen eventually became.
I didn't know about that. We'll get onto that. that. But like learning just about that, like especially the ethnic Russians getting hanged, getting killed on stakes, seeing it's just absolutely insane. And I think what's going on in Donbass is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. The European Union should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. NATO should be ashamed of themselves. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a left wing, whether you're a libertarian, the fact that people can't wake up and see this.
Yeah.
Neo-Nazis in Ukraine, like the amount of neo-Nazis that are there. Like I'm not saying all Ukrainians are Nazis. I'm just talking about the army. Can I just say the New Zealand shooter and the Buffalo shooter? Fun fact. About the New Zealand shooter, right, in 2019 where he was... You remember that?
Vaguely. Which one
The
was it?
Christchurch shooting.
Oh,
The
yes.
Christchurch
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Christchurch shooter, and it's not just that. The Buffalo shooter were all inspired by the far-right group, the Azark Rebellion. It's just absolutely insane. And the fact that NATO is not doing anything to like label this group as a far-right group or terrorist group is just insane, Craig. I mean, what is NATO? Dude, they should be arrested and tried for war crimes.
Well, once again, like I said, I was okay with the treatment of Mussolini by the Italians and what they did, how they handled that situation. And that's unfortunately what needs to go down because that's the only thing that's going to stop these people. And the reason why I was mentioning Operation Cyclone, and which was connected to Operation Mongoose, which was the Mujahideen, was the most fanatical, craziest group that we could fund to fight the Russians because they were doing our dirty work, just like we're funding the Azov Battalion, which is the most psycho, dirtiest group of all time. Like we fund ISIS.
And also ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda. And guess where? In Latin America, all these other groups. Man, we were funding the Contras to go kill the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. They were selling cocaine, putting in the streets in New York and California, turning it into crack and killing people, all to fund a war where they were funneling money to psychos, to the craziest people. We have a history of doing this, Welsh, and that's why it's 100% justified in Russia doing what they're doing. Because why was the United States doing it? Oh, we want a proxy war. We want to find a way that we can bleed Russia financially. We can hurt them. That's why we took care of the things. That's why we did what we did in Afghanistan back in the days against the Russians. So we don't give a damn. It's all about obtaining U.S. hegemony. That's what we want. And the Russians, they have every right to do this. They're 1,000% justified as far as I'm concerned, Welsh. Putin tried to work the Minsk Accords. He tried not to get involved. He had no choice but to intervene. This is about their national sovereignty and their border security.
Norris, question for you. Sorry, I have to interrupt there.
It's okay.
Do you think if Donald Trump was in power, because a lot of conservatives say that if Donald Trump was in power, this war would have never happened. Do you think if Donald Trump was in power, do you think he would have continued to fund Zelensky, or do you think he just would have done the same thing Biden would have
done? That's hard to say. Listen, he might not have promoted it the way Biden promoted it, and it's not Biden calling the shots. We obviously know that there are people behind him, and I don't know, really, to tell you the truth. I can't stand when people go, oh, Putin respected Donald Trump. That's why he wouldn't have done this if Trump was in office. I mean, no, as soon as Biden got back in, as soon as the same war hawks behind him, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Jeffrey Pyatt, Victoria Nuland, these were the old anti-Russian Cold War hawks that were in power before Donald Trump got there. So when they got back into play, they started doing shit, started messing around in the Black Sea, started funding and pushing Zelensky. So maybe Donald Trump, if he was a lone wolf, wouldn't have done this. But I tend to think sometimes, Welsh, that these things are scripted that way. So you believe a certain thing, but Donald Trump's just doing his part and playing his role. And when he comes back into power, if he does come back into power, I think him and the conservatives will have no problem if they pull all that money out of Kiev, but then they put it in Taiwan to push back against Beijing. Because that's the difference right now, right? You know what I'm saying? The Democrats, they're anti-Russia. They can't stand Russia. But the conservatives and the populist right, they got a boner for China and the CCP and communism. So I think that when Trump gets back into power, if he does, and I think a lot of this shit is scripted, especially since our elections are not fair, that he'll just swing the attention towards China. And if it's Ron DeSantis and his crew, then they'll swing all the attention back to Latin America, because Ron DeSantis, along with all the other Florida legislatives, people, the Latin people over there, they're gusanos. They hate Nicaragua. They hate Cuba. They hate Venezuela. They want to intervene.
Haiti. Let's not forget Haiti right now with what's going on there. You know,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So they want to intervene. So it depends. Pick your poison. I think whoever maintains power, whoever gets in power, will dictate where we'll spend the most money on our foreign policy and our intervention.
Here's a bit of an outside bet. So obviously right now the Ukraine war is just about coming to an end. Scott said he thinks it's going to end in spring. Well, everyone, of course, would put money towards China and Taiwan. In your opinion, though, let's say the Taiwan-Chinese war doesn't happen somehow, what do you think would be the next war next? Because a lot of people are saying Turkey and Greece could be the next war. They're seeming to get a bit ahead of each other. A lot of people are saying that, Armenia, what's that country next to Armenia that keeps giving Armenia a hard time?
Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan. Country. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
My pronunciation, folks. What, in your opinion, would be most likely between those wars that happen?
There's always a chance that a conflict can kick off in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and that would set a domino effect of this country, NATO country against that country, and so that's an area, it's a hot spot. However, I do think that, and I honestly think that this is coming. I think it's going to be more attention directed down in Central and South America. I think there's been a little bit of a lull, even though the State Department and the CIA and the FBI and all these NGOs have been pumping a lot of money into trying to dictate what happens in Latin America. There's a lot of natural resources down there. And Donald Trump the other day, about a week and a half ago, declared war on the cartels. And he was talking about the cartels as using the cartels to make sure that he's going to stop the flow of fentanyl here, that he's going to use every measure. He's going to label them as an enemy combatant. Well, that's just code for going and still messing around in these countries in South America. And in that speech that he had 2 weeks ago, a little commercial on it, you can just put up Trump versus the cartels. It's like 4 minutes. He also says a government that doesn't play ball, he's going to make them pay as well. So I still think there's a lot of attention that's going to be refocused down in Latin America. I don't think they want a canal going through Nicaragua, because that would really kind of put dents in the Panama Canal that's controlled by, American maritime law. So there's resources in the global South. There's canals that could be built. There's governments on our border, which I don't think the United States government wants anybody to see a socialist government succeed. So that's something they don't want to see as well. So I think there's going to be, no matter what, a refocusing of attention, foreign policy money, intervention in South and Central America. I really do believe that.
So speaking of that, Craig, you obviously, with how you look at the Ukraine situation right now, so we all know the mainstream media is obviously saying that Ukraine is winning, but of course they're not. They're running out of energy. They're running out of oil. In your opinion, after the war is finished, after Russia has defeated Ukraine and has taken, the eastern part of Ukraine, because they've got no interest in taking Kyiv, and there's rumors that like Poland and Moldova are going to take the left part of it. Once Russia wins that war, how do you think that it's going to impact the world going forward? Do you think it's going to make the world a better place? And do you think that, especially with Ukraine losing the war, which is, it's mostly a globalist, New World Order state, do you think that with Putin doing that, do you think that this is going to be a big defeat, especially for the World Economic Forum, the New World Order? And do you think it's going to bring, especially with BRICS coming through, do you think that, with Russia growing as a superpower, do you think it's going to, make the world be a more peaceful place?
On the surface, it seems like it's a yes, but, I'm still skeptical and kind of, curious about what the plans are by these elites behind the scene, the predator class that is, and what they're trying to do. You just mentioned something that Ukraine could be this kind of like new world order, QR code tracking, right? This type of state. That seems like that's what they was meant to be. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to the military industrial complex, they don't care who wins the war. They don't care who loses the war. All they care is that they had the war. And at the end of the day, I think it's working like a charm for what the predator class wants, and the military industrial complex. And they wanted to bleed Russia no matter what. And even though Russia will be victorious as far as on the battlefield, they'll have suffered some serious casualties, financial, discrepancies and all this shit that will, be harmful to them and to their bottom line. But no, I don't think it's going. I just think America is going to just pivot to something else, somewhere else, and do whatever. That's America's business. Divide, conquer, imperialism. So it's not going to stop the American psychos from continuing what to do. The only people who's going to stop the American psychos from doing what they're doing is its citizens. So I do think that it will be a calmer, more fair region. I think you'll see China and Russia grow stronger as superpowers, but this is only one conflict in many to come. I'm more fearful of nuclear annihilation than I am of anything else because, it seems like you have a hegemony in the United States. Whoever's pulling the strings, whether it be oligarchs or eugenicists or whatever it's going to be, that they'll fight to the very last human. So I am not so confident moving forward because I just think it's just a sign of more war to come.
So before we finish off, Craig, I just want to ask you two things. So one more question. Sorry, two more questions. What am I saying there? This one question is everybody right now is, especially in the libertarian movement, people like Angela McGurnall, who's a very smart person. Shout out to her. I had her on my show for an interview. She was on your show. She did a very good job. I think she's very good at doing what she does in the Libertarian Party as the head chairman. A lot of people have been talking about potentially, if the 2024 election gets rigged again, which it probably will, the United States going into civil unrest. There's a movement, coming out of Texas right now called the Texas Independent Movement that's becoming more popular. And there's a big independent movement coming out of Florida, which is becoming independent. Do you think that the United States will somehow end the Federal Reserve, that people will rise up, end the Federal Reserve, or do you think that civil unrest will come to the United States and Florida and Texas and New Hampshire will end up splitting? And if they do, can you see them surviving on their own economically? And would you be for them succeeding?
I don't think that's going to happen. I do think probably before we'll see, I think there's a good chance we'll see civil unrest, right? Like if things break down, we don't make anything here anymore. We don't grow our own food. We don't fix anything. We're completely dependent on outside sources. So I think for us to get back on our feet, it's going to be a total breakdown. I think the oligarchs are just going to pick up and move to other countries, leave the Americans here to try and slaughter themselves. And maybe something will be birthed out of this. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. As far as Florida and Texas, I don't know. If chaos breaks down, then maybe they can become their own thing. But as long as we're, still controlled in a nation state, they'll never let, Texas and Florida secede anyway. So it's an interesting question. But I think that, unfortunately, since the fact that the United States is dependent on everything outside themselves, that you might see some breakdown. You might see some people go off the map. Some people go into the woods, set up communes. And when the smoke clears, maybe a new society will be built. I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing.
So, before we move on to the second question, who do you think is going to be the world's superpower going forward? Because, we all know it's going to be China, but who do you think would be? Because BRICS is coming up. We all know the United States is going to lose its world status as a world superpower because it's coming to an end now, pretty much. Who do you think? What is your opinion about Russia and China and potentially India being the world's superpower? How do you think that they will be the world's superpowers, economically, and what effect will it have socially and all that stuff in different cultures? And do you think that they will be a better superpower than the United States would be? Basically, the BRICS union of Russia, China, India, and you know what I mean? The multipolar one.
Well, you think that all power corrupts, and at the end of the day, somebody's going to get in there that's going to be very powerful and manipulate all the mechanisms, of control. And I think that's in the future down the road for whatever state becomes the superpowers. But you did mention the three states that, number one, control a lot of the resources. They have all the resources. Russia is sitting on all the resources, right? So those who control all the resources are going to control the world. So I do think that those three countries have somewhat already joined together, Russia, India, and China, and they're picking up some loose ends around them and picking up some other states that are going with them. So I think their blueprint, America comes in with their missiles and the tanks. China comes in with their checkbook and their development. I think that's a greater model, a better model. I think that, regardless of how you feel about what's happening behind the scenes in China or what's happening behind the scenes in Russia, the way they do business.
And let's not forget Africa too. Yeah. Africa is also another nation, Morocco, Rwanda. I've heard amazing things, about You know, and if Latin America can somehow turn itself around, Brazil's got a lot of potential. They just need to get them, and Mexico too.
Yeah.
You know, and also Turkey. Turkey's another country that I've heard, you know, has
well, all those countries got to break away from their controllers, right? So all of Latin and Central America is trying to break away from the United States Monroe Doctrine style of control, but that's still a long ways away. Africa has colonization all throughout it. You know, it's got to break away from these people. The thing about China, Russia, and India is now they're calling their own shots, right? So they have their own freedom. They have their own sovereignty. So we can see a clear road for them. It's these other countries. Could they break away? That is the question. You know, Morocco's aligned themselves with the West. So they got a lot of things to deal with. Morocco still has a dispute with Western Sahara. And this is something interesting because that particular Abrams Accord that Donald Trump signed, where people are like, oh, this is great. You know, Israel's now come to the table with Morocco. Yeah, they took away a lot of land from Western Sahara, which has a lot of phosphates, the majority of phosphates in this world. And that goes towards a lot of fertilizers, and countries who want to, you know, industrialize their countries need those phosphates. So it's interesting to see what Morocco will do in the future. And there's a lot of disputes going on over there. But these other countries you speak of, Russia, China, and India, they have their national sovereignty. It's up to the other countries to fight to get their sovereignty as well.
Mm-hmm. So, before we finish up, what's one last thing you would like to say, Craig? And where can people find you?
Well, I don't know if I got much to say about anything right now other than the fact that thank you for having me on your show. It's interesting, and I had a great time. And, you know, my name's Craig Pasta Jardula. I'm part of the Convo Couch, my partner Fiorella. I also have another show called AM Wake Up. I do mornings with Steve Poikonen from Slow News Day. I just want to say to everybody out there, thank you for supporting independent media, and keep supporting independent media. Another interesting guest I had on the morning show was Maj Toure from Black Guns Matter, Welsh. And he had talked about the formula moving forward. It's like what we have to do is we have to find bonds with independent citizen journalists like yourself, like me, and get behind them. And instead of relying on the mainstream media, we got to put $5 in, $7 in, $12 in to send these people over to these places to get the real information and to bring it back to us. So that wheel and that mechanism and that momentum has already started. We got to keep it going. And you can find me on the Convo Couch. We have a Rockfin, a Rumble, a YouTube, AM Wake Up, which stands for Anarchy in the Morning. That's on Rumble and Rockfin. You can find us there easily. And you can always go to Yo Pasta at Twitter and get my links to everywhere I'm at. And thank you so much for Welsh for bringing me on. And thanks for everybody out there supporting independent media. Keep supporting it. To the people that are the truth tellers and the citizen journalists that are going to go over to those spaces and give you the information you need to hear. Keep supporting that.
No worries. Well, I just want to say it was a pleasure having you, Craig. It was wonderful having you on. And I just want to say to everybody, please go and subscribe to Craig and Furiella, and also their show, The Convo Couch. It's a fantastic show. It's very enjoyable. And I just want to let everybody know, my main YouTube channel has a strike, so that this video, my main YouTube channel has a strike. I'm not going to be able to upload for 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to, upload videos on Rumble and my backup YouTube channel. So please go and go follow and subscribe, to my backup channel, and go, subscribe to my Rumble. So I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic episode 89. Please remember to like and subscribe. Share this video with your friends and family. Have a nice day, everybody. Enjoy. Take